The Fisher King. Parsifal had been accompanied by good fortune, without quite realizing it. It was good fortune which had helped him against the Red Knight. It was good fortune which had brought him to Gurnemann, who had given him the training and instructions necessary for a knight. And it was good fortune which had brought him to Queen Condwiramer. And in one fight he had earned her hand in marriage and the crown of a king. He had been very fortunate indeed, and he had lived in great happiness with Queen Condwiramer. But as time passed, he thought more and more about his mother, Herzeloida. He did not know that she died of grief in the very hour he had left the forest. And now that he had achieved knighthood and gained a kingdom, he wished that his mother was there with him to share his happiness. It would not do to send a messenger. No, he must go himself and tell her how well he had fared, and bring her back with him from the solitude of the forest to his palace. He was loath to part with his wife, but he had a duty towards his mother, and so there came a day when he took to leave of Queen Condwiramer and set out on his journey to the great forest where he had spent his early youth. He rode for a day, but as evening came he found himself in a region quite unknown to him. There were hills, the slopes of which were covered with dense woods, and there were lakes, but nowhere could he see any sign of human habitation. Was there any place where he could find shelter for the night? No king's castle or peasant's hut could be seen, and so Parsifal rode on until he came to one of the lakes he had seen gleaming between the hills. He was glad to see several people there, whom he took to be fishermen in a boat on the lake. Parsifal hailed them, and the boat came towards them. As the boat approached, he could make out that there was one man in it who was dressed up in splendid robes of purple and ermine, such as only a great lord or king would wear. The other men in the boat seemed to be his servants. Nearer came the boat, and now Parsifal could see that the face of the noble lord or king was indeed pale and bore the mark of great suffering. When Parsifal asked him where he could find shelter, the sad-looking man said, "For 30 miles around, there's no house except one that is nearby. At the end of yonder cliff, you will find an uphill path. Follow that path, and you will reach a castle. I myself will be your host there tonight when I have done fishing in this lake." Parsifal thanked the man, whom he called in his mind the Fisher King, and then he followed the directions given to him. The path up the hill was steep and winding, and more than once he thought of turning back, for he could see no sign of a castle anywhere, and he began to wonder if he had not been sent on a fool's errand. But just as the sun set, he saw in the golden glow of the dusk over the trees the towers of the castle. There was a great moat around the castle, but as Parsifal approached, a drawbridge was let down, and the gate was opened to receive him. Pages and squires came to meet him in the forecourt, and when Parsifal told them that the Fisher King had sent him, they bade him welcome. They helped him from the saddle, they led him to the chamber of the castle, where they helped him out of his armor. They brought hot water and towels for him to clean himself, and a beautiful silken coat to put on in place of his travel-stained clothes. All of this was the kind hospitality one would expect from a house of a very rich noble or lord. But in one way, there was something strange and unusual about this castle. There was no laughter or shouting or noise that one would hear in any castle. No one even hummed a song or whistled, and even the pages acted with gravity of old men, not like young boys. Knights or squires or pages, they all showed Parsifal every courtesy, but there was no smile on any face. and they all seemed weighted down with some great sorrow or unhappiness. Parsifal wondered what was the matter with them, and what was the matter with the lord of the castle, whose pale and suffering face he just could not forget. But he well remembered the instructions of his teacher, Gurnemont. A knight must not be inquisitive. He must not ask too many questions. So in any case, if these people had troubles, it was no concern to him. And so he asked no questions, and when he was ready, he was led to the banqueting hall. It was a more lordly hall than Parsifal had ever seen. Even King Arthur had nothing equal to it. Chandeliers with hundreds of wax candles spread soft light, and in great fireplaces of 3, logs gave warmth as well as a lovely, pleasant scent. Along the walls were many couches on which knights rested, and by each couch stood a table. Raised above the others was the place of honor, occupied by the Fisher King. Although the hall was well heated, he wore a robe of fur, and he seemed to shiver in it. He said to Parsifal, "Forgive me that I don't stand up to greet you, but believe me, this is not lack of courtesy that prevents me from doing it. Please, just take your seat beside me." Parsifal had hardly sat down when a page appeared before the Fisher King, carrying a beautiful sword with a golden hilt and a jewel-encrusted sheath. The host took the sword and gave it to Parsifal. "It is for you, my honored guest," he said. "It will serve you well. It will never break, except in one danger. And what that danger is, it's only known to the master of the sword who made the sword." Parsifal was still stammering with his thanks for this very precious gift when he became aware that all the talking in the hall had ceased. He too fell silent, and a hushed side door opened up, and in came a man carrying a long spear in his hand. The man carried the spear through the hall, and Parsifal saw to his amazement that the point of the spear was red with blood, and drops splattered on the floor as the man walked through, before finally leaving at another door. Deep sighs could be heard, but not a word was spoken, and Parsifal was greatly puzzled to know what it all meant. But he wondered even more about what followed next, for now entered a lady, followed by 2 pages. She carried in her hands a vessel, it seemed of crystal. It shone so brightly that all other lights in the hall seemed pale and wan. And Parsifal heard a whisper, "The Grail." And as this thing called the Grail was carried by the lady, round the hall a great number of pages placed golden bowls before every guest. And then the strangest of all things came to pass, for as the Grail was carried past the tables, each bowl was filled with food the guests liked best. Parsifal, too, found the golden plate before him filled with food that no one had served, and as he saw all the others were eating, he helped himself as well. And when they had all eaten, the lady with the thing called the Grail left. By now Parsifal felt very curious indeed about everything, but he also remembered the rule not to show curiosity. What would his host think of him if he showed bad manners, such as asking questions? So he just kept silent. When the meal was over, the host said with a deep sigh, "Well, I think your bed is ready. You must be tired after your long journey, so I advise you to go and rest." Parsifal rose and thanked the host again for the beautiful gift of the sword, and wished him a good night, and left. All the other knights too arose, and some came to show him his room. Parsifal was indeed tired, but he was also bewildered by what he had seen, and now that he was alone, he could also feel a strange premonition of distress. It followed him even in his sleep, for his night was disturbed by nightmare dreams. He felt himself pierced by swords and trampled under horses. With a groan he woke up, covered in sweat, but he was glad to see it was already daylight. He expected that at any moment a page would appear to help him dress in his armor. But alas, no one came. Have they all been called away to fight an enemy? Thought Parsifal. They could at least have told me. I would gladly have helped them. But it was no use speculating, and no use waiting any longer. He got up and put on his clothes, and with some trouble got into his armor. There was the sword he had once taken from the Red Knight, as well as a precious blade he had recovered from the Fisher King. He put them both on, and he left the room. There was still not a soul to be seen in the castle, so Parsifal went into the courtyard. There he saw his horse tethered to a post, and his spear and shield leaning against the post. He knocked at some doors and windows, but there was no answer. Well, he thought, they don't expect me to say goodbye then, it seems, but they have made things all ready for my departure, so I will be on my way. He mounted and rode towards the gate. The drawbridge was down, and Parsifal rode over it, but just before he had come to the end of the bridge, somebody behind him quickly began to pull it up so that his horse had to jump to clear the gap. Parsifal turned around furious and shouted, "What manners are these? Not letting me ride to the end of the bridge?" From the ramparts of the castle came a voice and an answer. "Ride on, you fool! You were too stupid to use your mouth for anything but gulping up all that food last night, and a curse is now upon you for not asking what you should have asked." Wow, it was a shock for Parsifal that from people who had been so courteous the day before should now come to such rudeness and curses. He shouted, "What do you mean by all this? What question should I have asked?" But there was nothing again, just a silence, and no one answered his shouting. Parsifal felt again the dark foreboding which had been with him all the night. Upset and unhappy, without knowing why, Parsifal spurred his horse and went down the winding path which had brought him up to the castle the night before. Soon he reached the cliff where the path began, and then he was again in the region where no human habitation could be seen for miles. But as he rode on, the countryside became more familiar to him. Surely he had passed the stream and that mountain. When he rode from the forest to King Arthur's court, he must be getting nearer to the great forest and to his mother. Turning a bend, he came upon a sight he had seen before. It was a woman with a dead knight. Surely it could not be his cousin, Sigurd, who once told him his name, but as he came nearer, he saw it was indeed Sigurd. She looked aged now by many years. She was dressed in all black, and the dead man was now laying in a coffin at her feet, and was now embalmed. The woman, too, recognized Parsifal and said, "Don't be surprised, cousin, to find me here. I have sworn to stay with my dead lover until my own life comes to an end. But if there is one thing that can bring joy to my grief, it is the sight of the new sword in your hand. I know this sword. It tells me you have been to the Fisher King." "Yes, I had," says Parsifal. "He gave it to me." "Dear cousin," cried Sigurd with joy, "you have been to the castle of Mount Sauvage, the castle of salvation. You are indeed blessed, for you have seen this holy Grail." "Well," said Parsifal, "I did not know the castle was called Mount Sauvage, but I saw some strange things there." "Surely you did. And have you asked the question that brings the highest honor there is in the world?" "Question," said Parsifal. "No, I did not ask any question." "You wretch!" cried the woman. "You saw that ailing, suffering man, the Fisher King. You felt no pity, no compassion, that you would make yourself ask what was his hurt, or why he was ailing?" "It would not have been fitting for a knight," stammered Parsifal. "Not fitting!" cried Sigurd. "You fool! You wretched fool! If you had thought less about what is fitting, and if you had a spark of pity in your heart, you would have gained honor beyond your dreams. Know then that it was ordained by that which is called the Grail, that the Fisher King, who did a great wrong shall suffer from a painful wound until a knight comes who will, out of himself and unbidden, ask, "Why are you ailing?" And as soon as that question is asked, the Fisher King's wound will be healed, and the king who asks the question will be rewarded with the highest honor. But you, in your dumbness and in your pride and coldness of heart, you for whom the Fisher King and his whole company of knights of the Grail have been waiting, you have kept silent, and so you have lost the greatness that was to be yours. And having failed to ask, you are cursed. A curse is now upon you. Go away, cursed one. Leave me alone. But Cousin Segun, said Parsifal, for me the place was only a night's shelter. I'm on my way back to my mother now in the forest, and I gave little thought to anything else. To see your mother, said Segun. You will have to seek her in heaven, as she died of a broken heart the day you rode away, thinking of nothing else but your own glory as a knight. You thought only of yourself when you left your mother. You thought only of yourself when you kept silent before the Fisher King. And so you have lost your mother, and you have lost your place amongst the knights of the Holy Grail. To Parsifal, every word she spoke was like a shattering blow. His mother dead, and he had caused her death. A curse was upon him, and he had caused this curse. His mind could not grasp. At long last, he said, I cannot bring my mother back to life again. But I can at least go back to the Grail Castle, to Mount Sauvage, and ask the question I did not ask the first time. Segun looked up now and said, Poor Parsifal, no one can find the Castle of Grail by seeking for it. Only the Grail itself guides those who are meant to find Mount Sauvage. All others can never find it. It was given to you from birth, by the noble blood you have inherited. It was your precious inheritance to go find the Grail Castle, but you forfeited this inheritance. Without a word, Parsifal turned his horse and rode back the way he had come. He remembered well every mile he had traveled that day. He was determined to find that cliff and that path winding up the hill towards the woods of the castle. For hours he explored every hill. For hours he searched for that lake on which he had seen the fishermen. But he found neither lake, nor cliff, nor path. It was as if all had been a dream, and there was no longer any trace of it.